Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I'm just about getting ready to go up and see my family. I'm gonna do a 3-hour drive. On my way up, so where I'm going, I'm in Fallon at the moment, but I'm gonna have to go towards Mammoth to go see my family. It's about a 3-hour drive from here, and it's not that bad. I've worse. I think some people usually drive on their way to Thanksgiving. On my way there, I'm gonna have to go through Walker. So Walker, the town of Walker in California, it got hit pretty bad by a fire a couple weeks ago, and it's been scorched to the ground essentially. Um, it's quite tragic, but they opened up the road so people could drive by it, but the town itself has been pretty much obliterated. When I go through it, I'm going to take some video and maybe some pictures and upload the carnage so you guys can see it. It's very bad. Hopefully we can send our thoughts and prayers to them. But that's the sad news of the day. What I kind of wanted to touch on is kind of say happy Thanksgiving. I hope you guys are enjoying today, and I just wanted to touch upon why I think Thanksgiving is such a special and important holiday. My take on the history of Thanksgiving. So I'm going to explain the history of Thanksgiving, throw my 2 cents in the equation, and at the end of everything, I'm going to throw my 2 cents on Thanksgiving in general, some things that we might want to do in the future as far as Thanksgiving, and why there's some things in the holiday that are being overlooked that I think that we need to be brought to light. So first, as far as the whole history of Thanksgiving going on, there's really two things that are happening. So the setup of Thanksgiving, obviously, we know is the Mayflower Pilgrims having a harvest dinner with the Native Americans of the land when they show up, and that's essentially what Thanksgiving is. But I kind of want to talk about the build-up to that point. There's a lot of build-up that is being overlooked, I think, especially on the Native American side up to that point, and how there's so many little coincidences going on that it's almost like it's on purpose. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, people, like, especially God has his hand in everything, and this is something that you kind of like examine the history of it. This is something that God, like, we're just puppets of God, and this is something that he's worked his hand with. And I think that all of this is quite a miracle in itself, and that God had his hand in all of this, whether you believe in him or not. There's so many coincidences leading up to the point. It's a miracle. The Thanksgiving dinner in a nutshell is a miracle, and it would not have happened if any of those little coincidences would have came through. So we all in school we're taught like the European side of the story, and there is a Native American side of the story. That's something I kind of expand more on, but just so we get a rough idea. So obviously it's the Mayflower. It was like the Mayflower and the Santa Maria, and there was like at least, I think, 3 vessels that set sail from Europe. So, but the people on the settlers were Puritans. What Puritans were is they were essentially radical Protestants. There's a lot of churches in America that kind of have that same. So Quakers came from Puritans. There's some other sects that came from the Puritan ideology. I think America as a whole kind of follow that radical Protestantism. I was brought up in a like non-denominational Protestant church, but the church I go to currently is they're non-denominational, quote unquote, but they follow more Calvinist ideology with a little bit of Roman Catholic ideology as well. They try to stay true to the true church, but that's kind of speculative. Just saying. So that's basically what the church I'm going to now is more of Calvinist, was kind of like the Calvinist ideology is kind of like a radical Protestant ideology when you in a nutshell. And so that's what the Puritans were. And what they were upset in England. They thought that everybody in England were not following the ways of God due to like materialism, like they were too focused on material values. They go have to have this very nice clothes. They were really focused on stuff like that they didn't think that that was important, because God is important. And they didn't think that government was following the ways of God or anything. They were just really upset with society. They wanted to get out of that. They want to be more pure with God. So at first they didn't really settle on going to North America. What they actually, it's kind of funny, because when you think about it, they actually went to Holland was the Netherlands. So they're like, oh, the English are so impure, let's go to Holland. Was kind of funny to think about, because I think a lot of British people today, if they want to go vacation somewhere that isn't so far away from home, they go to Holland. So they went to their vacation destination as close to home. It's like, oh, these people are more pure. And then they got to Holland, they stayed for a little bit, and they're like, wow, these people are worse than the British. So we have to get out of here. So then they actually ended up regrouping back in England. And under John Smith, who was the captain of the Mayflower, they set sail to the New World. I guess they decided that, we don't want to be a part of society anymore. We don't like the way that they're writing things. We're just going to go to the New World and set up our own society and be pure with God there. We're going to live under how God wants us to live over in the New World. So that's something they wanted to do. I'm not saying that's... I think a lot when people explain like the Puritans, like, oh, they're trying to follow the ways of God. I think God definitely had his touch there. I'm not denying that, but I think God had more of his touch on the Native American side, and I'll explain that very soon. So obviously, I think it takes 6 months to set sail from Europe to North America at that time. So let's say they arrived in December of 1620. So let's say they left in June around. I don't know the exact. So on their way there, I think before they even landed, they're like, okay, we have to start a society. So they started the Mayflower Compact, what essentially is it's a compact. I'm trying to regroup my thoughts. I'm sorry. So it's a compact saying that, this is how society is going to run. These people are going to have these types of things. These are kind of like the soft laws that we're going to carry once we get there. And everybody has to be in agreement, or else this isn't going to work. So they signed it. My experience with this, they kind of teach you in school, where it's kind of the same concept of, we're going to put, the example that they used in school when I was in school was like, we're going to put 5 people on a desert island, and we have to make up a government so that nothing falls apart. And so that's essentially what they did. And I'm not denying that it is a big thing, and the Mayflower Compact is kind of like the preset. The Mayflower Compact and the Magna Carta and all of that are kind of the pre documents that kind of set forth up to the Constitution of people coming together, and we're going to make this grand society type deal. So that's why the Mayflower Compact is so important. But going back to so essentially they set sail, they do the Mayflower Compact, and they arrive in what would be Plymouth. Once they get there, the Plymouth colony of Massachusetts. But on the Native American side, what I want to talk about before they even meet the Native Americans is kind of explain the Native American side of the story. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do. Okay, so when the Puritans reached the I have notes. When the Puritans reached their destination, they were actually supposed to go somewhere else, but they got lost, and then they ended up in the Plymouth colony. Well, was soon to be the Plymouth colony. They ended up in what would be today Massachusetts, New England. So they came across the it's a hard word to say. Wampanoag people was essentially a confederation of tribes, and they were the Wampanoag people. If you kind of study Native Americans, a lot of Native Americans do that. There's a bunch of tribes come together and they make a nation. So it would be the Wampanoag Nation. The famous one that the founding fathers looked at when they were trying to think of ideas for the Constitution were the Iroquois Confederation. And there were some other confederations as well. I'm explaining soon that they met a person named Samoset who helped the settlers organize a treaty with the Wampanoag Nation. Was actually very important. So I'm going to talk about Samoset really quick. So Samoset, he actually came from Maine, an area around Maine, and he knew a little bit of English, talking to some people that have kind of been there before, some fishermen that were probably up from Canada. So he was kind of used to like the customs and everything. No, he witnessed it, he observed it, he knew some of it, but he also observed some of the English language. He didn't know English fluently, but he knew some. So he was able to, with his, the fact that he knew English to begin with is just a blessing in itself. But he was able to talk in English with the settlers and also the Wampanoag Nation, and they were able to assign a treaty. That treaty was never broken, and I know people are just like, oh, white people making treaty with the natives, but natives are actually at that time were used to signing treaties with each other. What would happen is a lot of tribes, what they would do is that they would follow herds of deer. So they would follow herds of deer. If a herd of deer went somewhere, they would obviously follow them. And that if that was in a territory occupied by another tribe, or if they had to go through that territory, what they would do is that they'll sign a treaty with that tribe saying that either we could pass, or if the herd stays, that we could linger and follow the herd. So the concept of treaties, the Native Americans knew about. They signed treaties with each other all the time. So that concept was already there. So what Samoset did is he just kind of helped the settlers sign a treaty with the Wampanoag Nation. That's actually crucial. Don't overlook that. That's very important. Where they set up in New England, I've never personally been to northern New England, but what I've heard is that it's very dry and rocky terrain. It's not really ideal. The whole reason why the southern part of the United States was the agricultural mecca, and then the northern part was set on manufacturing, is that the northern part of the United States, especially along the coast, geographically is not very good for agriculture. It's a very dry, arid, rocky place. So what the settlers wanted is that they signed a treaty that they get to stay on this little place along the coast. For them, that was a good thing because they wanted to set up a port. But I want to kind of reiterate, if in looking in terms as like the Wampanoag Nation, is that would have not been prime real estate for them. I don't know if you've ever canoed out in rough seas, and it's possible, but it's really easy to lose your what I'm trying to say is that gathering resources along the coastline and in the ocean, there's a high risk, low reward. But if they went back into the woodlands and set up in the woodlands, that would have been a high reward, low risk. So the fact that they wanted to set up in a place along the coast, that wasn't quite prime real estate for them, so they were able to do away with that. So later that comes on, and I definitely want to touch on, is that the reason why they were, before I do that, I forgot to explain that how they came across Samoset is, I guess Samoset was part of another confederation of tribes up in Maine, and I guess he was coming down to speak to the Grand Chief of the Wampanoag people, and I guess that the name of that person was Massasoit. His name is Massasoit, the land that later became Massachusetts. I think there's a theme. Um, so Samoset was visiting Massasoit, and he came across the settlers, and they were able to sign a treaty. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to go see the guy. Let's work something out. I'll help you guys. So that's what they were able to do. There was another character that came in the place called Squanto. I knew about Squanto, but I kind of had to brush up on my knowledge before I did this video. I knew these things, but I wouldn't be able to describe it in complete detail. So I kind of had to review my knowledge. Do not overlook Squanto. Squanto is so important, and let me explain. So Squanto was originally part of that area, but what happened is he got picked up by explorers, Thomas Hunt. So he was picked up by an English explorer named Thomas Hunt. He was captured, essentially. He used to be a chief of a tribe that was there previously. When Squanto came back to his homeland, they were no longer there due to illness. That's important, but that's something I'll bring up later. So Squanto originally went to Spain. Thomas Hunt brought Squanto to Spain. His actual name was Squantum. But, the Spanish are like, oh, I don't like the at the end of your name. I'm gonna replace that with O. Make your name better. I fixed your name. It's now Squanto. That's something I could see the Spanish doing. What they probably did is that the Spanish, especially with natives, is that after they converted them to Christianity, they'll give them a Christian name. So I could probably guarantee that his original name was Squantum, and then after he became a Christian, his Christian name became Squanto. So he was actually sold to a clergy in, let's see what it's called, in Malaga. So he was sold to a clergy in Malaga, Spain. And what they did is and this is over a period of years, might remind you, is that they actually gave him a education, but also a Christian education, and convert him to, I'm going to assume, Roman Catholicism. That's very important. So he was probably very well versed in English because of the explorers. He had to spend time with them. And he was probably well versed in some Spanish, since he was taught Roman Catholicism. And then he was also given a European standard education. After all of that, he actually went on an expedition, not expedition, but he was an amusement piece for, he was an exhibit, that's the word I wanted to use. He was an exhibit in England. After that, they picked him back up, they took him to England, and there he was an exhibit. He may have met, they're saying that he may have met Pocahontas there in England, which could be true. That's not exactly proven, but he was a exhibit in England, and therefore he was able to refine his English, and then be able to speak English fluently. After all that, they took him back to his homeland in Massachusetts. And remind you, this guy was a chief. He was picked up, captured, sent to Europe, Christianized, given a European standard education. I'm going to assume a very good one at that fact. Picked back up, took to England, and then after they were done with him in England, they took him back to North America. He tried to find his tribe, but apparently his tribe got sick from illness and they all perished. Might remind you, this guy was a chief, so he got picked up. He was a leader. He was a leader. He was a chief. He was in control of a tribe, and when he got back to his tribe was no longer there. That's important because he was a man without a purpose. He had all this new refined knowledge on how the Western world worked and how they thought, and he was able to come back, and he could eventually explain all these things to his people, but unfortunately when he got back, his people were no longer there. So he was kind of like he was a man without a tribe. He was a lone wolf type character. So as the settlers came across Somerset, Somerset and actually went and got Squanto. Somerset was pretty much, hey, I know a guy, let me go grab him, I'll bring him back to you and he could help us out. When Squanto met with the settlers, remember the settlers arrived in around December. They were freezing cold. A lot of them died. So I'm guessing that the Wampanoag Nation in Somerset were witnessing all of this. It's like, wow, you guys really need some help. You have no idea what you're doing. So Somerset went and got Squanto, and Squanto came in spring, in March specifically. So they had to wait some time, probably about 4 or 5 month period till Squanto came. So Squanto came, helped him. He spoke fluent Englishly, but I think it's something that was overlooked is that he's talking with Puritans. He's talking with these very radical Christian people. And Squanto, he's very well versed in the Christian belief. Very, very well versed. But not just that, he speaks English fluently, and I guarantee you that he actually had a better education than some of the settlers there, than the time he spent in Europe. So he's a well-educated person, probably the most well-educated person in that whole setup. Very well versed in Christian ideology, really, really well versed in English, and I'm assuming Spanish. He was just a hyper-intellectual type person. Not just that, but he was a natural-born leader. He was a chief of a tribe, but not just that, but he's a leader without someone to lead. And so he was given to the settlers, and then now Squanto, he has purpose. He could be. I'm assuming he could be sort of like a chief again. So, and that's what he does. He teaches them how to plant food where they're at, and teach them how to make clothing. The settlers aren't stupid. They know how to teach make clothing, but Squanto had to teach them. It's like, okay, with the materials that we have here, this is how you make clothes. And something that was completely underlooked too is that he taught him how to put a seed in a fish and then bury that fish in sand, add water, and he could eventually grow food in sand. It was amazing. And they're so lucky that Squanto was able to teach him that. And I think that's something that we that is so cool that they were able to learn that. And so before I continue, there's something I forgot to mention that I thought was funny, is that Samoset, when he came across the settlers in the beginning, he immediately asked them for beer. He's like, I know you have some, and I want it. Maya reminded you at that time, especially coming from Europe, the water wasn't clean there, because of feces in the river and all of that. So beer was the healthiest form of nourishment that they could come across as far as drinking. So if they wanted something to drink to stay hydrated, it had to be beer. It was the cleanest thing that they could do. And so they kind of took that with them. The Puritan settlers had a lot of beer with them, because coming from where they come from, that's the only thing they could drink. So obviously they maintain that same mindset. It's like, when you go to North America, we need beer, or else what we can drink. So when Samoset saw the settlers, he's like, okay, where's the beer? I know you have some. I want some. It's just something I wanted to throw in there. I thought it was really funny. So Squanto taught the settlers how to farm and gather food, and he probably taught some of them how to hunt in new terrain as well. So that he kind of got incorporated into the settlement, taught him how to do everything. But when harvest time comes around, like late fall, like around the time it is now, like late November, it's time to harvest. So that the time came, they had a harvest. It was recorded on the day that they decided to do their whole harvest festival, Thanksgiving. The men went out in the morning. They hunted for food alongside of the men of the Wampanoag people. So men from both sides, the settlers and the tribes, were hunting together to gather food for the feast. Obviously, I think it's safe to assume that the women were back in the settlement, um, making other types of food like squash and stuff like that, and gathering from the field food that they could use for the feast. And then the feast itself was made up of 50 settlers that survived. They lost a lot of people in that winter. So I think they had like 100 and up to 200 people. They lost probably 50 during the way over there, and then they lost 100 during the winter. So they were only left with like 50 people left. So they had 50 settlers, and they actually had dinner with 90 men from the other tribe. No women, just men. So obviously, that 90 men, that's essentially a war party. So they were having dinner of a war party. So think about how humble the natives were during that feast, and how appreciative of the settlers had to be that, they could have been killed quite easily, many times over, but no, they were shown mercy upon, and then given the tools needed to survive was a blessing in itself. After that day, I'm not quite sure what happened. I'm sure they coexisted with each other. But that was essentially the history leading up to Thanksgiving in a nutshell. After that, Thanksgiving was a holiday and it was celebrated, but it wasn't as readily celebrated. When before Abraham Lincoln, George Washington proclaimed that, this Thursday, the 26th, he proclaimed it the day of thanks, and thanks for what you have. And essentially, the first Thanksgiving was proclaimed by George Washington. Later on, Abraham Lincoln also proclaimed Thanksgiving, and he made Thanksgiving very important because during the Civil War, he thought it was a great day for Americans to come together, at least on one day. And at least, they didn't have to celebrate it together. The North and the South didn't have to celebrate together, but at least have it a day where Americans can at least have like a ceasefire and come together and just kind of eat and just have this day of gratitude. And I think most importantly that came out of that is healing. I think that that's something that Abraham Lincoln really wanted, is that to have a day of healing. Now, Thanksgiving didn't technically, and Abraham Lincoln proclaimed Thanksgiving as a national holiday then, but it wasn't an official national holiday until Roosevelt in 1941. In December 26th, he proclaimed that, well, he didn't proclaim, he actually signed saying that the fourth Thursday in November is going to be the day of Thanksgiving, and Congress passed on it. So that was when Thanksgiving became an official American holiday. Now, also, what I wanted to now, some things I wanted to say about Thanksgiving was, okay, so what are some things other than thanks why the holiday is important? And what I said about that is that I think it's a day for healing of the nation. America is a very competitive place, and I think it's a day for us to kind of, drop our strife with each other, drop everything, and just come together, and not just thank each other for, for what we do, but thank you for being in our lives. Most importantly, just coming together and just appreciating the fact that you shared your life with somebody, either depending on what relationship you have with them, either it's a good relationship or a bad relationship, just coming together and just being thankful that you share your life with that person. Another thing I think that Thanksgiving is good for is a community coming together. Now, it could be any community, it could be multiple communities coming together, of any types, and I think that's something that is that needs to happen more. I think more communities need to have Thanksgiving with other communities, either across like organization lines or racial lines. I think that is something that is very important. And obviously, being thankful that we have food to eat. And that one's kind of a given, and that's kind of what Thanksgiving stood for in the beginning. But I think that kind of lost its way a little bit, and that's kind of something that I want to reiterate in this video, and kind of like bring back, because I think that was the original meaning of Thanksgiving. But being thankful that we have food, just kind of reminiscing on that fact. Future practices of Thanksgiving. Now, this is something that my generation does, and this is something that the generation before me did, and this is something that I think the generation after me is going to pick up, is having like a friend's Thanksgiving. Because, community stretches further than just family. Obviously, have Thanksgiving with your family, but also have Thanksgiving with, friends, or like a community outside family. I think is also very important. I was kind of talking to somebody about this video, and then they were like, oh, make sure you add that. But I kind of think that one is a given. If you needed to hear that, then you needed to hear that. But I think that one is, it's a given. Kind of have Thanksgiving outside of your family, with your friends. Or even if you don't like your family, don't be afraid to kind of gather up some friends for a Friendsgiving Thanksgiving. That's something that I think we should add. Also, I think that the president should have Thanksgiving with with our allies. Like, if the president we're gonna have like a Thanksgiving dinner with the Prime Minister of Great Britain, I think that is something that, as a nation, I think we should do, and I think our allies would appreciate it as well. Also, if this is something that Abraham Lincoln kind of focused on, but I think that we should reiterate this, is that if you're an American living outside of America and probably not surrounded by Americans themselves, I think that you should try to come up with a way that you could celebrate Thanksgiving there. Like, let's say you're an American living in, let's say, Vietnam, and then you have Vietnamese friends, but you're an American. I think that you should try to encourage your Vietnamese friends to have a feast, or at least try to organize a feast that everybody could participate in. I don't think just because you're like only American in a group outside of America that you shouldn't celebrate Thanksgiving, or at least try to celebrate Thanksgiving. I think that Thanksgiving is very hardwired into our being, and it's very important. And everybody loves a feast. Just try to, hey guys, let's do this feast. It's gonna be really, really fun. I don't know too many people are gonna say no to a big feast. It's just kind of one of those things that everybody loves. Also, another thing about Thanksgiving is that, everybody likes to crap on the fact that we all eat the same food on the same day. And I do think that maybe we should have some variation, but just think about how powerful it is that we all eat the same food as a nation together on the same day. What message of unity is there? I think that is very important, but at the same time, I also think a little bit of variation is important. And these are some things like people groups do. Let's say like Filipinos have lumpia on Thanksgiving, and then Mexicans will make tamales for Thanksgiving. This is what people